I just wanted to share a few things that I've learned doing property management. And every day it's a new experience, a new opportunity to learn. There's a few things that I've picked up over the years. Been managing properties since 2003. And I wish I'd started sooner. Had the natural fears, heard the horror stories of property management, and was scared to get into it at first. But sometimes I feel like you just got to put yourself in the situation so that you're forced to learn and figure it out, because everything can be figured out. Now there are different niches in property management. So like commercial property management, or what I do, which is more a light commercial property management, and then of course residential property management for traditional long-term rentals. Then you've got short-term rental property management as well, and I feel like each of those it takes a little different skills and different skill set. When I first got interested in managing other people's properties, I met with a property manager who was doing about 150 or so single family homes. And one insight that he gave me is he didn't like doing multifamily like a duplex or triplex, because he said then you are managing the relationship between the tenants. If they have an argument, they're calling you to settle the argument. And that is one part of property management, because when you're managing the properties, you're managing the payments, you're managing the relationship with the tenants, and you're managing the maintenance of that property. And so there is, different hats you have to kind of wear for each one. Now, with the light commercial, the typical experience has been different than dealing with residential. However, there's still going to be some overlap because you're dealing with people. I mean, this is a relationship business. It's human relations and customer service. So there's going to be similarities. For instance, I rent out these office spaces. Pretty much everything's included: rent, internet, everything. It's just pay your rent and you can access the property whenever you want to for business. And I had somebody who was renting out one of the units and sent me a picture of a water bug, and they're pretty big bugs, but they live outside. Occasionally they get in. It's hard to keep them out, and anybody around Hampton Roads has to have seen one at some point in time. I got a notice about 2 weeks later that she decided she just doesn't want to be in there anymore because of the infestation problem. It was one bug, and I actually did a treatment afterwards per her request. But this is, and I occupy this space too. I'm actually renting out some offices above me, and so there's just not that many bugs in here. Nevertheless, that's the kind of thing that I've seen from other people freak out about stuff, instead of just coming to me and just basically saying, hey, I'd like to get out of my lease because I'm not doing enough business or whatever. They kind of came up with this false premise, and as I shared with them in a voicemail, if I can get it re-rented out, you're off the hook. However, you signed a lease till this period of time, and I don't think the courts are going to see this as an infestation. So I'll get into the court thing word later. But again, there are differences, though, in the management of the properties. I mentioned earlier as far as managing interactions with people, and I've definitely seen this in the apartments that I've got. It's 17 units, and so there's a lot of people in a small area, and had issues with parking. Where I remember one night, it was around 9 o'clock, and just a huge argument about parking, and they're calling me, and I'm thinking, this is utterly ridiculous. There's no reason adults should be acting this way, and it's not like there were not other parking spaces they could have used. The one person was just set on this was their parking space, and a new tenant had pulled into their parking space. So it's those kind of things that are that you have to deal with in that situation. Whereas what I found with the single family properties that I'm managing is I don't hear from them very often at all, because they take more ownership in their property. You know, they're maintaining the outside of the property. Some people will even have a tendency to do small maintenance stuff inside of the property, and it's really what you want, because rent is a form of ownership. So as long as they're paying their rent, they have the right to use that property. So there is, and it technically is a form of ownership of the property. So you would want to have tenants in there who actually, you know, feel a sense of responsibility to maintain the home that they're currently in. But what I found is with single families versus the apartments, there's a lot more expectation of you serving them. You know, I've literally had to tell people I don't change light bulbs, that if you're calling me over for just the light bulb, I can't help you. And the you know, other things like that. Now, the big fears that I had initially before getting into property management was, of course, the house is getting trashed, and then also late night calls, you know, for emergency repairs. And while the late night calls do happen, they don't happen frequently. I guess unless you're, you know, the more properties you manage, the better chance that's going to happen. And then with the what was the other thing I said? With the fear of houses getting trashed, I have had that, unfortunately. But when I look back at it, it was because I placed the wrong tenant in there. I was under the assumption at this time, this was, you know, about 20 years ago or so, right around, it's early 2000s. And the person was in the military, he was in the Navy, and I was under the assumption that just that blanket being in the Navy meant that he was covered, you know, above and beyond. I could just call his commanding officer. Ultimately, I did do that, but then the commanding officer was like, yeah, this person's in debt all over the place. He may be able to set up some kind of small payment plan. And so that's where I realized, you know, you really have to focus so much on screening the tenants and properly screening tenants. Now we've gotten lucky in that there's a lot easier methods now to do it, because you can do it all online. You could set up through different apps to where the tenant pays for and does their own background credit screening. It's good to take the extra steps and find, you know, previous landlords and call them. However, I don't know how effective that is going to be, because you know, if you've got a person in a current rental property and you call their current landlord and the landlord just wants them out of the house, they're not going to tell you how horrible this tenant is. So you know, maybe some previous landlords, but again, the tenant's only going to probably provide you with the names of the landlords who would actually give them a good rating. So that should be used cautiously, but the background systems I found are good. Yeah, of course, you want to meet the person, have a conversation. Just again, it's so important to place the right tenant, and that is the struggle that I face when I've got a property that's listed for rent, because I feel it, because you're like, okay, I just want to solve this problem, which the problem is I've got a vacant property, and to solve it, I need to put somebody in there who's going to pay the rent. However, if you are too anxious and aren't patient enough to put the right person in there, it'll cause you so many more problems on the back end. And so that's, you know, one thing, like when I'm placing a tenant for an owner in a property, the owner is going, I'm going to work with them to place the tenant, because generally I'm going to give advice and they're going to say yay or nay. However, recently I had this again where I had to just keep reminding the owner, yep, I understand, you know, you've done all this time to renovate the property, you want to get somebody in here, but I've seen what it looks like if we rush to put somebody in here and we don't properly screen and don't make sure that they have, you know, good credit. I do place a lot of value on credit. I've seen some debates back and forth about that, but personally I think that having good credit shows that you've maintained your business in the past, so you're likely to do it in the future. And so I do think that credit score matters, and I know that they've done some recent tweaks to the credit scores. I think they've taken away some of the medical stuff, because medical payments, I do understand that pops up and that happens, but nevertheless, you know, people still got to handle their business and make sure they pay everything correctly on time. And I'll tell you, of all the struggles and concerns that I had, the biggest struggle that I faced lately with property management is the contractors. Is because you've got to maintain and repair properties as needed, and having reliable contractors to go out there and get the work done is so important. Especially if you get these emergency late night calls. And unfortunately, I've got a great plumber who has always been right on time with things. Show up same day, but they'll do emergency service. Of course, that costs a little more, but it's still a struggle. It's a struggle to just always find somebody, and also keeping the prices reasonable, because we've all seen the prices escalate for everything over the years. The past probably 2 or 3 years, inflation has just shot up. So that's the other thing, is knowing what a reasonable price is, because this seems expensive. However, compared to what it was 3 years ago when I'm looking at this particular service, I don't know whether it's a appliance repair or, pick a repair. It's going to be more money than it was several years ago. So kind of wrapping your head around the fact that, I understand this seems like a lot, but it's reasonable for what the costs are now. Besides that, the final issue, of course, that everybody worries about is the eviction process. And I've been through quite a few evictions, because these apartments I took over, they had placed tenants, and that was part of the issue. Was there was just a lot of tenants who shouldn't have been put in there, bad paperwork done, they didn't collect deposits from all the tenants. So especially when there was no deposit, tenants really had no motivation to clean up the place or take care of it. So anyway, what I've learned in the eviction process is that get your paperwork straight. If the paperwork's in order, the courts are going to side with you. You've just got to make sure you document everything and do everything by the book. You place a good tenant, hopefully you won't run into that issue, but you've got to make sure you've got everything covered in case you do. And the eviction process, I've heard horror stories from other states. Here, at least in my area, Virginia, I found it to be very reasonable. It's going to take you, figure a couple months to get a bad tenant out, because the courts usually are 20 to 30 days out or so. And it, could vary depending on the time of year and how the economy turns. However, that's not the worst thing in the world. You lose 2 months rent. See what you can learn from it, and work on placing a better tenant next time. Well, that's about all I got. A few of my insights into property management. If there's anything else any tips that you might know that you want to share with me, shoot me an email back. I'd love to hear anything that you figured out if you've been kind of dabbling in property management as well.